Okay, so is this making sense? So what I'm doing here on question number 6 so far is I'm taking the numbers they gave me. I changed it a little bit. I added a 5 to the third to the A, and I made C become 5 squared. I want to make it more interesting. And so my first step here is I first rewrite the primes vertically lined up. See how I give the 2's one column, and then the 3's, and then the 5's, and then the 7's, 11, 13, 17, 19. I give every prime its own column. I rewrite them all lined up. Okay, so now I'm going to figure out what is the GCF. Well, what is the GCF? It means the greatest, right? The GCF stands for greatest common factor. And so what does that mean? That means the greatest amount they have in common for each prime. For each prime. So I'm going to go prime by prime here. Prime by prime. And for each prime, I'm going to take the greatest amount that they have in common. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let me do a little, let me look at the 5's with you for a second. So I hope you're seeing this. This can be a little tricky. Look at the 5's for a minute. So this one, so I'll go back to the 2's and the 3's, but let me just jump right to the 5's right now. Do you notice that A has 3 5's, right? 5 to the third. B has 7 5's, 5 to the 7th, and C has 2 5's, right? So what's the greatest amount that they share in common? It's going to be 5 squared. Why? It's the lowest power. In other words, another way you can put it is the lowest power for each prime, because that's what they have in common. In other words, everybody has at least 2 5's, don't they? They have that in common. They all have 2 5's. Some of them have more. This guy has 3 5's and B has 7 5's, but they all have 2 5's. So that's the greatest amount they have in common. They all have 1 5 also, but that's not the greatest amount they have in common. The greatest amount they have in common is they all have 2 5's. That's the GCF. That's the greatest amount they share in common, is they all have 2 5's. Does that make sense? Questions on that so far?
So it makes sense, but the only thing is, what if we're not given? Because I know you had altered the question. So for my question, I only 2, like A and C match multiple numbers, but B lacks like a number, so to make it all complete. So if that makes sense.
So are you saying, Martine, that there's never a time when you have all 3 having the same prime?
Yeah, in my problem, there's none that have all 3 of them.
Gotcha. Good question. Yeah, so let me write a note on that, because I know that does happen sometimes. If there's no, wait, let me write it better. If there's no primes in common to all 3, then in that case, the GCF is actually 1. The answer would be 1, because, and the reason for that is because 1 divides into all the numbers. We're not even showing 1, but we understand they really all have 1 in common, because 1 divides into every number. So in that case, if there's nothing else in common to all 3, the answer, the GCF, is just 1. Good question. Let me go on with the 7's here. Look at the 7's for a minute. What's going to be the greatest common factor for the 7's? What do they have? What do they share? How many 7's do they all have in common? Yeah, just a single 7, huh? That's right on. Does everybody see that? It's just a single 7, right? Because they do, that's all they have in common. This guy has three. A has 3 7s. B has only 1 7. C has 4 7s. They don't all have 2 7s or 3 7s or 4 7s. They all have 1 7 though, don't they? So the greatest amount of 7s they have in common that they all have is 1 7. So again, you're just taking the lowest power for each prime. So the lowest power on the 7s is just 1 7. The lowest power on the 5s is just 5 squared, isn't it? So what's the lowest power on the 2s? Well, none. None, right? Because B and C have no 2s. They have no 2s in common. They don't all have 2s, do they? Everybody seeing that? They do not all have 2s. They do not have 2s in common because B and C have no 2s. So that's no on the 3s, no on the 11s, no on the 13s, no on the 17s, and no on the 19s. So I'm only taking the items in which they all three share something in common like that. So I'm trying, so what's the answer to my question then? So the GCF in my problem is 5 squared times 7, done. That's what they share in common. They all have 2 5s and they all have 1 7. That's the greatest amount that they have in common. That's the GCF. That's what they share. Questions on that? So again, we're just taking the lowest prime, the lowest power for each prime. The lowest power. So when it comes to 2s, the lowest power is none. When it comes to 3s, the lowest power is none. When it comes to 5s, the lowest power was 2. When it comes to 7s, the lowest power was just a single 7. When it came to 11s, the lowest power was none. 13s, the lowest power was none. 17s, none. 19s, none. So there we go. Questions on that? Okay. Now, in the homework, you're going to also have where they just give 2. Let me do one of those real quick. In the Unit 2 homework, I'm going to grab it here. Unit 2
I have
homework.
a question.
Question?
Can you go back to number 5 for me before? Oh.
Let me see. It's kind of hard for me to get back, honestly. Can I answer your question? Can you just?
Yeah. I didn't know what I should put down for E, because I have everything from A through D finished, and then E asks, and this means that greatest common factor of these two numbers equal to what?
Right. So that was the final answer to the question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was just what they have in common on that. Here, let me try another one with 2. Let me try question 7, and I'll show that final answer as well. So looking here at question 7. So again, I'm going to take A and B and rewrite them lined up. So here we go. A equals, so 3 times 5 to the third times 7 times 11 to the third times 13, and then B is 2 and 11 to the third and 13 squared. And so we're going to line these up. And then we'll do the GCF. Okay, and so if you've only got 2 of them, so remember what you're doing. The lowest power for each prime. So I'm taking the lowest power for each prime. So when it comes to the 2's, what's the lowest? The lowest is none. When it comes to the A's, I'm sorry, the 3's, the lowest power is none. When it comes to the 5's, the lowest power is none. When it comes to the 7's, the lowest power is none. When it comes to the 11's, the lowest power is 11 to the 3rd, right? They both have the same power, so the lowest is just that power. When it comes to the 13's, the lowest power is just a single 13. It's just this one right there. Okay, so then what's the answer overall to our question? The GCF then is this and this put together. So 11 to the 3rd times 13. So your final answer to the question is just the stuff that they have in common. 11 to the 3rd times 13. That's the greatest amount that they share in common. That's the greatest common factor. That's all they have in common, and that's what they share.